Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms networking.com and at the associated website. So information, resources, services, activities, and so on for people who work in and around the global MedComms community, by which I'm talking people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and so on. You'll find lots of information, lots of activities at medcommsnetworking.com, but I'd also point you at NetworkPharma TV, which is where we now have a large collection. There's more than 500 videos on all matters related to MedComms, and a lot of it is generated out of webinars like this. I'd also make the point that at firstmedcommsjob.com, we provide a lot of information for people who are interested in joining MedComms, maybe as a medical writer or account manager or whatever. So we've got a great big audience again today from all over the world, which is great. I'm delighted to have my panelists with me. We're going to be talking about freelancing in MedComms. And I'm going to just start very simply by asking everyone to introduce themselves, and then we're going to have this freewheeling discussion. And members of the audience, please chip in with your comments and observations and questions. We'll weave that into the discussion. But we're going to start with an introduction from everybody. So Julia, we said we'd start with you. So over to you. Tell us who you are and a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here. So I'm Julia. I'm a medical editor at freelance, and I am also a coach for freelancers. So I started in scientific publishing nearly 20 years ago, and I then moved into MedComms and was in agencies in-house for a while. And then in 2015, I went freelance. At the time, I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a permanent thing, but it turned out I really love freelancing. And I trained as a coach a couple of years after that as well. So at the moment, I'm living in Worthing on the South Coast in the UK. Yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julia. We're going around in alphabetical order. So Vicki, you're next.
Yeah, hi. So thanks for having me, Peter. I'm Vicki. I'm a freelance medical writer and account manager. I've had quite a hybrid role over the years where I've sort of straddled between both roles, which has been quite nice. It offers quite a lot of variety. I started off after my PhD in communications with medical devices. I then moved into a traditional medical communications agency, and I went freelance when we relocated back to North Yorkshire because there was no jobs up here. And like Julie, it wasn't something I was sort of intending on doing long term. I thought it would just tide me over until I found something, and that was 12 and a half years ago now. So it's quite nice being able to straddle two different sides. I do a lot of work on events because I can do both the client services side and the medical writing side. So that's me.
Fantastic, thanks. And Odel, you're next. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. My name is Odel. I'm a freelance medical writer, and I've been freelancing for just a couple months now. So a little bit about my background. I've worked in academia. I did a PhD in microbiology, looking at new treatments for lung infections and cystic fibrosis. I was then a research fellow for some time before deciding essentially that academia really wasn't the right path for me, but I did really enjoy writing, so I moved over into medical communications. So I worked in a large MedComms agency that was in-house, and I left that position towards the end of last year. After that, I took a little bit of a career break, did some traveling for a couple months, and basically made the decision to go freelance at the beginning of this year. And I'm based in the UK near London.
Excellent. Okay, so you're our newbie today, which is great.
Yep.
Kathryn, we actually might be, just for what it's worth for information, we've done this webinar about this time every year for several years, I think. It just seems to be becoming an annual event. And Kathryn, you've been with me each year, I think, partly because you've authored our guide that we published about how I'm basically making it my own business being a freelance medical writer. Anybody's interested in that guide can download that from our websites, medcommsworkbook.com, and the other sites that I've got. So thanks for joining us again, Kathryn. Just tell us a bit about yourself.
All right, thanks, Peter. I'm Kathryn. I've been freelancing as a medical writer for 13 years this year. having started in large pharma. So I started off as a research chemist in the lab and then moved into clinical research, where I managed phase 1 and later clinical trials. And then I think similar to what Vicki said, I really loved the writing side of it. So moved into medical writing and then became freelance because I wanted to spend more time at home. And I tend to write both in MedComms and regulatory aspects of medical writing. And I'm based in Tring in Southeast England.
Excellent. Okay, so look, guys, let's start with a couple of sort of rules, as it were. Not rules, that's the wrong way of putting it, but set the scene a little bit. So great to have the 4 of you with me. And between the 4 of you, you've got quite a lot of experience and quite a lot of the breadth of experience. So not just writing, editing, account management, and so on. So that's excellent. We are all based in the UK, though, so we've got a very international audience today. So much of what we will talk about will be, what I'm trying to talk about is just generally about life as a freelancer. So it sort of applies wherever in the world you are. But it's maybe worth just putting a little bit of a health warning and saying we will probably all be talking a little bit UK centric, or we'll drift into that a little bit. So people watching from outside the UK, think about your own tax rules and legal laws and so on in terms of self-employment and so on. But hopefully what we'll talk about will give you some good things to think about. I think I'm going to do what I always do and just very randomly move around, and we're freewheeling this a little bit. Members of the audience, please come in with your questions and we'll try and any observations and comments. I know we've got good people in the audience who are experienced freelancers as well, so please contribute to the discussion. But I basically will be freewheeling a little bit and randomly picking on you to talk to us. So, and I'm going to start, Odel, with yourself, sorry, but I'm going to start with you because you're very new to freelancing. And I just wondered whether you can think back a few months, and it's just a few months now, think about when you were going freelancing. Let's start with the basics. What were the sort of concerns you had? What were the sort of questions you were looking for answers for? How I'm going to be a freelancer or whatever, practicalities and so on. Just give us a little bit of a sense of the sort of questions that you were asking a few months ago.
Well, there was a lot of questions, but yeah, definitely a lot around the logistics of becoming a freelancer. So I've kind of been in full-time employment my entire life up until this point. So this is completely new to me. Learning the basics of, whether to work as a sole trader, whether to work under a limited company, how to get your first client, what contracting system should you use, what kind of insurance do you need, all kind of questions like that were the ones that were at the top of my list.
Okay, so Julia, let's drag you in, and you said you're a coach as well as an editor in your own right, but you're a coach, and one of the things you do is you're starting to coach people who want to be, if coach is the right word, sorry, you can put the words right if you like, but you're encouraging and helping people who want to become freelancers. So pick up on what Odel's been talking there, and maybe from your point of view, what are the sort of obvious questions that people should be thinking about to begin with, and what's your advice to them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Personally, when I started freelancing, it wasn't really a choice. It was just a necessity to tide me over while I thought about what I wanted to do next. So it really took quite a long time to bed in almost to freelancing. And those questions were answered over a number of years. So actually, it's a real pleasure now to help people do those things much quicker and find out and help them ask the right questions a lot quicker. So, how do you actually like to work? Quite frequently, if you're working in an agency, no one's ever asked you that. So now you can kind of make your own rules, is something I like to say. So, you can, if you don't want to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, you can actually now do something a bit different. Obviously not wildly different, because it's nice if your client emails you that you're actually there to reply at some point. But yeah, it's one of my favourite things about freelancing, especially people who are just going into it, is reminding them that you can now choose a bit more about how it's going to work for you.
Okay, so Kathryn, I'll bring you in next. So again, the same sort of question, and I'm sort of thinking of the guide we wrote, or you wrote, and the sorts of advice we were given. Just pick off some of the practicalities. Would you advise someone to go to an accountant, for instance, and talk to an accountant? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Just give us some signposts as to where you should be going at that stage?
Yeah, I think following on from what you said, Julia, as well, it's all of a sudden you are accountable for everything that you do. So, you know, you are a business owner. I think that's the biggest thing that I learned when I made that leap into self-employment, is all of a sudden everything's down to you. So you have to take, we're very good at saying, oh, I'm a freelancer, I'm just a freelancer. And actually we are business owners, and we have to take that business very seriously, because if we don't, then we can't expect anybody else, including our clients, to. So on that basis, yes, as you say, I would highly recommend somebody to go and speak to an accountant, look at the practicalities of where you're going to work. And with everything that's happened in the last 2 to 3 years, I think that's, you know, everybody's a little bit more focused. It's not just working from the kitchen table, you know, have an area that you can dedicate to working, so that you have everything that you need around you, and also that you can, if you're able to, close off when you finish working, so that you have that break from the office, which I think is really important. And just, I suppose, getting the infrastructure in place. So, you know, have an IT person that you can call on, because inevitably you're going to have IT issues, or, you know, it is just making sure that you have everything in place so that you can work comfortably from the place that you choose to work, and have it where you can think about the processes that you can put into place to help you, because you are wearing many hats as a freelance business owner. You know, you're not just a writer anymore. You are looking at business management, business development, marketing, finances, bookkeeping, training for personal development, because this all comes down to you to keep your business afloat. And at the end of the day, you want to look at longevity. You want to look at ways in which you can keep your business going for long term.
Absolutely. I think this is a really important point we're sort of skipping around at the moment. This idea that you think of yourself as a business when you start freelancing, because it's a mindset that if you see yourself as a freelance writer or editor or account manager or something, there's a different mindset to, I'm a business owner and I'm running a business, and I happen to be delivering this sort of work. Vicki, have you got a comment on that? So, and you cross a number of, you've got this hybrid role. I'm not sure that's actually relevant, but you know, have you got any sort of comment on that sort of sense of being a business person, and applying that to the sort of work you do?
Yeah, so really it just echoes what Kathryn says. It is very easy to sit there and say, I'm just a freelancer, or, oh, I'm self-employed, but it encompasses so many different things that I think you don't really consider when you first set out. I mean, I started trying to do everything for myself, but in the end I decided to get an accountant, because that side of it I was finding more difficult. And also the accountant not only helps me with my tax return, my VAT return, my corporation tax, my self-assessment, he also gives me a lot of advice. So when IR35 came in, he was there to give me a lot of advice on that, and he still does. So I think you've also got to think about the outside things that can support your business. You know, where, like, I know it sounds like really simple things, but I've got my printer set up with HP ink, so that automatically comes in. That goes through my business. Getting your mobile phone through your business, you can claim through your business a bit towards your expenses, so for gas and electric and things like that. It's knowing those little things that you can do, which nobody really tells you. So unless you've got an accountant telling you that, you might miss those little things. I mean, when I say you can claim a bit for your gas and electric, I think we're talking about something like £18 a month. So it's not going to, you know, make a huge difference to you, but it all adds up. So it's the little things like that. So you need to think about the outside people that can help you as well.
I think also just pursuing that line of thought, I mean, one of the things that I think about with the freelancer is there's a financial discipline to all of this. I do personally think an accountant is very, very useful. I know people who don't want to spend the money on the accountant, but I do think they're very, very useful. The problem with the finances is it can get out of control, can't it? You know, if you forget about the fact that every so often you are going to have to pay some tax or VAT or whatever, and you've already spent it, that is a problem. And so are we all actually agreeing on an accountant's a good thing? I'm sort of looking at you to all sort of nod your heads. You can argue with me if you like. I just have interest, are you all VAT registered? Again, this is a bit of a UK specific question, but
yeah.
That's a couple of you not VAT
Yeah.
registered. Okay, Julia, just say a few words. Oh, sorry, Vicky, go on. Yeah,
I was going to say, I went VAT registered at the time because it was to my benefit. It was back when you could claim a bit of that VAT back. So now, because you're pretty much paying the 20% VAT, I'm not sure that I would have gone VAT registered. I mean, my primary reason for doing it was because I think I paid HMRC 11% and I was claiming 20%. So
that was, sorry, just to be clear, that was when there was a flat rate VAT system,
yeah,
which
yeah.
changed a few years ago.
No longer,
Yeah, no, exactly.
and it's no longer in place. So I don't know if going VAT registered, it's not as attractive now, and I'm not entirely sure if it's of benefit or not to be VAT registered.
I'm smiling because everyone knows my views. Yeah, go on, Julia.
We've spoken about this recently, haven't we? And personally, because I'm a coach and I'm an editor, obviously all my editing clients are VAT registered. So in that respect, it could be okay to be VAT registered. But because most of my coaching clients are not, that would mean a quite large price rise for them, in which case it's not really worth it for me.
Okay. I'm going to stick to my guns. Who's trying to talk over me?
Sorry.
Is it Vicky? Sorry, I couldn't see.
Yeah,
Vicky, go on. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, actually, if you are VAT registered, when you are approaching a new client or you get some new client work, somebody approaching you, it's really important to actually tell them that you're VAT registered if they don't ask, because I've had it where I've done some work for somebody and because it was on my email that I was VAT registered, they hadn't noticed that. So it came as a bit of a shock to them when I then invoiced them and they were like, oh, I hadn't realised you were VAT registered. So it's really important that you get that verbally into a discussion because they hadn't read my full email.
Okay, and again, let's not go too far into this. It's one of the important aspects that people need to think about. I mean, my advice to anybody actually is to go VAT registered because I think there is a small advantage in your favour and there isn't very much work to do. So why not take the little bit of advantage? What you don't really want to do is start freelancing non-VAT registered in the UK and then quite quickly go VAT registered because that can mess things up a little bit. But there is no point, there's no problem changing midway, whatever. You do have to be a bit careful because the VAT rules require you to be VAT registered at a level which, is certainly achievable by many people in the freelance business if they work hard at it, sort of thing. So there's a number of aspects that go on in there. Maybe the only message is to think about that. And think about your tax rules and how you're going to be taxed and what that does to cash flow and remember that things like tax bills have to be paid at some point. IR35 in the UK, but there are other rules around the world are about self-employment. Maybe this isn't the place to get too bogged down in it, but it does affect the way that clients and freelancers work with each other. So again, the accountant can give some advice on that one. Quick hands up for let's go professional insurance. Professional indemnity insurance, do you all have PI? Everyone's got PI. There's a whole webinar to be done in that, maybe. The pros and cons, you'll find people who don't agree with that. I think, again, I would just say to anybody looking to become a freelancer that they need to think through those insurances, professional insurance, professional indemnity, maybe even public liability type insurances, depending on what you're doing. Again, accountants, insurance brokers, whatever, can give you a bit of useful advice. Also, just freelancers talk to each other. It gives you lots of advice, sort of thing. We've got quite a few questions coming quite quickly, actually, all of a sudden. Let's try to pick out as I'm talking, as I'm watching. But I thought, Odel, I would start with you again with this one because there's several questions around this. Let's address the obvious point. You decided to go freelance. How did you go about getting clients? How did you go about getting your first client?
Good question. So my first client was someone that I was already familiar with. So it was a contact I previously had. So when I approached them and I mentioned I was going freelance, they were like, "Oh, yes, we'd love to work with you." So that was really good that it was quite easy securing the first client. After that, I have to say it was a little bit of an emotional roller coaster in terms of getting the client that followed after that. So there was a period where I was approaching people on LinkedIn, talking to recruiters. People were approaching me on LinkedIn. There were some conversations happening around there. And then within a few weeks, I managed to secure another few clients. So yeah, definitely LinkedIn was a very useful resource in the beginning.
Okay, just out of interest, your first client was someone you knew. Your second client, was it someone you didn't know or someone you did still know?
So I didn't know them. They approached me, in fact, on LinkedIn. They found me through LinkedIn. So I'm a big advocate of including as much detail as you can on your LinkedIn profile in terms of the services that you offer, what you do, just to make sure when someone is looking for a freelance medical writer, when they're searching for that, hopefully your name should pop up or they should be able to find you without too much difficulty.
Okay, so let's go into a little bit more depth on that one. Kathryn, I'm going to bring you in. Would you, I mean, this point about, when you start as a freelance, I think you say, and I would certainly say, the first thing you do is you write down the list of all the people you know, because your own network, your own contacts are probably going to give you the early kick in the way that it has with Odel. Kathryn, have you got? Would you like to say a bit more about that? Are you agreeing with me?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was one of the things I learned. So when I first went freelance, I enlisted the help of a business coach. So everything that's in that guide is stuff that I've learned through the business coaching. And one of the things that really stuck with me was, if you write down a list of people that you know, say start off with 20 to 30 people. And then, of course, they then know 20 to 30 people. And so it kind of snowballs on like that. So I kept a spreadsheet. This was before GDPR came in, the data protection things. But I would keep a spreadsheet of everybody that I'd connected with, if I'd gone to conferences or people that I knew from when I was employed. And then I decided to write a quarterly newsletter. And that was one of the biggest generators for me. That was before LinkedIn really kicked off, but newsletters every quarter just to the people that were on my mailing list, that often sparked a kind of reminder, because you have to remind clients that you're there. They're very busy doing their day-to-day things. So by connecting with them in some way, whether it's through LinkedIn or however you choose to do so, just can act as a reminder. So I'd often, if I sent out my newsletter, I'd often get an email from somebody saying, oh, we just need some help doing such and such a document in-house. Have you got any availability? So I found that was a useful way. But yeah, definitely start off with a list of everybody. Even I've had work through a neighbour, just from chatting to a neighbour, and it just happened that she knew somebody who worked in a MedComms agency. I mean, it can be as random as that. I think as a freelance business owner, whoever you talk to could potentially become a client or know somebody who could become a client. So you're constantly networking. Yeah.
I think the networking is really, really important. I mean, full transparency, I run a service, the MedComms Workbook, which you're all members of. And one of the things it does is it sends on work opportunities from clients and so on. There are various directories, there are various services out there, there are platforms that you can become part of to go and say, I'm looking for work, and in theory, the work comes to you. But time and time again, when we're talking, it comes back to the most likely source of long-term good income for you are people you know, which is actually one of the reasons. I don't know, Julia, have you got a view on this? We've got a couple of questions coming in about when. I think they're along the lines of, when do I go freelance? Do I need experience in an agency before I go freelance? I mean, again, my argument, well, I suppose it's a bit more nuanced than that, but simplistically, get as much experience as you can before you go freelance, partly because you have the contacts. It's not just because you then know what you're doing, it's because you have the contacts. But Julia, have you got a few words on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking exactly the same, that obviously there are nuances, but I really would recommend working in an agency for a period of time. It's different for everybody how long that is. Personally, I worked in agencies and in scientific publishing for 10 years. And during that 10 years, I kept up with everyone I met, didn't burn any bridges, that sort of thing, just keep in touch with everyone. It is quite a small world, MedComms industry. So everyone knows somebody who knows, it's a really strong network. So if you kind of keep up with everyone, even when you leave a job, then when you go freelance and then you message everyone you ever worked with on LinkedIn saying, hi, I'm freelance, it's actually, I'm not going to say easy, but it's easier if you have done the groundwork in that respect.
Exactly. And very often, one of the things, again, I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming in. I mean, let's just put some context here. I think you probably all do a little bit outside of MedComms, but the conversation today is around MedComms, yeah? So keeping that as the context, you're all basically working for MedComms agencies. Are any of you working directly with pharma, just out of interest? Okay, so some freelancers do, but as a rule, people who are MedComms freelancers are tending to work for MedComms agencies, and they're working for pharma. So that's the sort of the chain there. So that might give a bit of context for some people. Vicki, let's bring you in, and again, let's just pursue the sort of the new business development type of activity that you do. Have you got any thoughts on what you've done to get the business?
Well, actually, like I said, I've been freelancing for 12 and a half years, and I've always been very fortunate. I tend to find that I work with agencies long term. So I was with one agency for 7 years, another agency which has just come to an end, I was with for 5 years, somebody else for 3 years. So I tend to do longer term. And that's just developed from I'll do one project for them and then they just keep coming back and giving me new SOWs, and I just become one of their preferred freelancers, which is a great way to be able to work. But actually in January, for the first time ever, I lost 3 of my clients because the pharma clients cut back, and the agencies no longer needed me, and I was left actually with very, very little work. So I had to go on a new business drive, and it was a lot more difficult this time than I've ever experienced in the past. I was, like Kathryn and Julia have said, I went to everybody that I'd previously been in contact with. I reminded them of who I was. I sent out emails, and I think I probably sent about 100 emails, and I probably only got about a quarter of them responded to, and a lot of them were coming back saying, I'm really sorry, we're really quiet at the moment. So I really had to sit down and think about how I was going to generate new business. And for the first time again in the 12 years I've been doing this, I actually went with a recruitment agent, and they have secured me some more work, and it seems to be picking up again. I'm getting people who I've worked with in the past coming back to me. But I think you've just got to be flexible, because I'd always said I'll never work with recruitment agents, and I always find that they're quite persistent, I think is the word. And you often find that they ring you up promising you the earth and submit your CV and then never hear anything again, and they never respond to your follow-up emails. So I find them quite frustrating. But actually I've had a really positive experience with this particular one that I worked with. So I think it's just a case of, being open to lots of different channels as well.
I never say never, I think, is a piece of good advice in any line of work. But it's interesting what you're talking about, and let's just sort of face up to that one a little bit. I mean, everyone knows we're here in April 2023. There's no doubt that the last few weeks, last 3 months, say the beginning of this year, was a lot quieter for a lot of freelancers in and around MedComms than most of us have experienced for quite a long time. There does seem to be a sense that it's picking up again at the moment, but there's a sense that things have been a little bit different, certainly to begin with this year. But feeding into a question that came in, or a comment that was made earlier on, as a freelancer, I mean, it's sort of logical, isn't it? You're one person with one pair of hands. You can do one thing at a time, sort of thing. So there's a tendency to focus on the work that you've got in front of you. So this sort of feast or famine type of idea that people talk about, you're either, you've got too much work or you haven't got enough work, is a very real problem, isn't it? Kathryn, again, just talk a little bit about that, because I think with experience, I think it's probably fair to say you relax a little bit. Odel, I'm going to come to you in a minute and ask for your view, because you're a bit newer to this, but just talk a little bit, Kathryn, from your point of view, this feast or famine. Let's not get too bogged down in what's been happening for the last few weeks. Let's assume we're coming out of that, but the feast or famine type of issue that you deal with as a freelancer, just talk a little bit around that and what you've done to maybe deal with that in the past.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it has been just this year. In over the 13 years I've been freelancing, there have been quieter periods. So I've built up quite a client list over the years, but I can't say that I probably work with a very small percentage of them at any time, because their projects come and go in cycles. So, and people move on. So I think, freelancing is generally a roller coaster of lots of work coming in, and then it might go a little bit quiet. But I have to say, I think the one thing I've learned is not to panic. I mean, even as Vicki was saying, work has come in. If you have that tenacity as a freelancer that you go off and look at the different channels in which you can get work, and you've got the experience behind you, you will find work. And in fact, one of the things I'd say as a freelancer is we always go into freelancing, and I did it. I mean, I started freelancing in June, which was probably the worst time of the year to go in because everybody disappeared off on holiday. So I was very quiet to begin with, other than some work I'd already got secured from a previous employer. So I think it is just not panicking, making the most of those quiet periods to get everything else in order within your business, and realizing that that is part of freelancing. And you know, you will find work one way or the other. It will come to you. And I think that's part of the adrenaline kick of being a freelancer, is that there are going to be quieter periods of time, but it does, as I say, it does allow you, and I think to get other things in order. But also remember, when you go freelance, or you're thinking about going freelance, we always go down this route of what if we don't get enough work. But on the flip side, I've had periods where I've had to turn work down because there is, you know, if you're good at what you do and you have good client relationships, word of mouth travels, and you can get into a situation where you have too much work, and then you don't want to let people down because you've taken on too much work. So we always tend to go down the negative side of, oh, what if I don't get enough work? But it does happen that you can have periods where you have too much as well, and not to forget that, and put, again, processes in place or strategies in place that allow you to handle that too.
Can I just add to that?
One of those strategies, go on, Vicki, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's a really important point, that actually you can get too much work, because I learned the hard way in that I kept on saying yes to everything. And I think you're at risk of doing that, especially when you first start freelancing, because you're worried about that feast or famine. So you just say yes to everything, and then you start working ridiculously long hours, you're tired, you then start making mistakes, and then the client starts really scrutinizing your work and comes back with really nitpicky things, which, you know, in the past they might have just picked up a spelling error or something and corrected it, and would just say to you, oh, there's a few mistakes, but I corrected as I was reviewing. They then pick up on everything, and that really affects your confidence. And then, of course, your quality of work goes down, and it's okay to say no. And in fact, I've actually had clients say to me, oh, okay, that means that you're obviously very busy, and it looks good to be able to say no, because it means that you're in demand. So I think it's a really important point to say, do not overstretch yourself. Like I say, I learned the hard way, and it's something I'll never do again.
I think it's hugely important, and you never get it entirely right. You always wonder, what if I'd said something? But basically, the simple point is, if you say yes to work and don't deliver, your client won't come back to you. If you say no, there's at least a good chance they'll come back to you for whatever reason, because you haven't let them down yet, sort of thing. It's an interesting one. A lot of freelancers talk about the difficulty of dealing with that, and that sort of, as I say, being able to say no. So Odel, come on, you're brand new at this. Does this resonate with you? And you're sitting at the beginning, you know, does this make sense to you? Are you already experiencing this little bit of panic when it goes a bit quiet and so on? How do you feel?
Yeah, so basically I 100% agree with everything that Kathryn and Vicki have said. So unbeknownst to me, I apparently became a freelancer during what some people called one of the quietest Q1s they've seen for a few years. So that wasn't really that great to hear. But I would say don't lose faith. As long as you're consistent, thinking outside the box in terms of how to get clients, as long as you're persistent, you will find the work. So for me, my experience after I signed my first client and I was looking for additional work, I think it took around 5 weeks before I went from a position of, oh, am I going to get more work? A little bit worried, to, oh, now I have multiple offers and I need to turn some down and decide which ones I'm going to accept. So that was good. But during those 5 weeks, you have to remember, you know, control your thought process. Don't lose faith. Don't have some confidence in yourself, and the work will come.
Just out of interest, did you go into this thinking that through and thinking, maybe if I'm going to start in January, you know, I need to have, I don't know, 6 months money in the bank just in case things are a bit slow? I mean, did you think it through at all? And if you did, give us a bit of a sense of what your answer to that was.
Exactly that. So I made sure before I left my agency position, I had a 6-month emergency fund. In essence, that would be enough money that you could spend to cover 6 months worth of living expenses without being paid. Just because the other thing I didn't quite realize at the time when I first started freelancing is how long it can take from actually making the move to receiving your first payment as a freelancer.
Right.
So just as an example, I decided to make the move in January, was talking with clients in February, signed the contract, started working with them in March, but the first payment won't be until the end of April. So now you've gone from January to April with no payment. So if you've got that emergency fund there, that kind of removes some of the stress of, oh, am I going to have enough money to pay my bills and so on. So yeah, 100% would recommend definitely have that resource there for you so you can remove that one stress.
Vicki, any suggestions on that front? I mean, do you, and again, there's no right answer to this. We need to be a bit careful not to get bogged down in this. And some people have very strong views on this one. But typically, are you charging at the end of a project, Vicki? Are you charging some money up front and during the project? You said you work on longer term projects. So is there some presumably stage type payments as you go? Just talk a little bit around that. As I say, there's no right answer for this, and every individual circumstance is different, but talk a bit.
No, I've never been. I've probably only had 2 or 3 occasions where it's been a end of project payment, and they've been like small ones, so they've maybe only taken me like a week to do, so it didn't matter that it was the end of project. I tend to work on a monthly basis, so a lot of my clients actually ask me to keep timesheets, so I just submit my timesheets and then I invoice monthly. And I think that's another thing, when you're looking at your contracts, you need to just check what their payment terms are, because I did have one client trying to give me a 90-day payment term, and I pushed back on that and said no, and I think we agreed on 45 in the end. So I think it's important as well just to consider that not everybody is going to pay you within a month. Some people like 45 days, some are 60, occasionally you get 90 days.
Talk to us a little bit about the contracts. What do we mean by contract? Are we talking a quick email, or are we talking a 50-page document, or just talk us a little bit about that?
Depends on the client. So the bigger agencies, I find, give you very in-depth contracts. Like I've just signed one that was 35 pages long, and you sort of like have to plow through it, and you do need to be careful of the contracts and what they've got in them, especially in light of IR35, because some of them are putting clauses in to say that you'll take responsibility for an incorrect IR35 assessment, which would mean that if HMRC were to come to the agency and say that they'd assessed you wrongly and they wanted payment, the agency would try and get that payment from you. And again, I always push back on that clause. I've never had a problem with having it taken out. But other clients that I work with, I've just got a simple non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement. So I think it very much depends on the client and also the nature of the work that you're doing.
Is it fair to say, who's been around a bit, Kathryn? I mean, I would say that it seems to me over the years, let's say the last 10 years, we've gone from a situation where it was relatively easy to pick up the phone to somebody and go, how about doing this? And maybe a quick email, to the point where it's difficult to do anything without some sort of more contractual type paperwork, which can feel a bit onerous at times. But do you agree that that's a trend that we've just inevitably followed?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I first started, it was a quick email, and I might send them a proposal with a cost estimate, and the way I have a document called How I Work, so it just kind of puts out some strategies of how I work, so clients are very clear. To now, I probably would be very reluctant, unless I knew the client, if it was a former colleague of mine or something, or I've worked with them before, I'd be very reluctant to work with anyone without a formal contract in place. But as Vicki said, that comes with its own challenges, which is why I think being a member of, in the UK, we've got various different like small business organisations where you can get legal advice or a legal review, especially in light of, like you said, the tax changes with IR35, just to check that you're covered. as a business, and you do kind of get used to the clauses and the legal speak eventually, but it is quite an onerous task at times. But yeah, I would be very reluctant these days to go into something without a contract in place.
Just
it's interesting though, isn't it? Because
sorry.
Go on. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, there's something I came across recently. So with my insurance provider, looking at the clauses within the insurance policy, it was actually stated that you must have a signed contract with both parties for the work.
Yeah. I mean, I just think generally we're in a society now which is much more orientated around getting these sort of signatures and this paperwork, which as someone like, I don't like paperwork, so I try to avoid it. But I think that's an inevitability about it. I think I was just going to say, what was I going to say? Sorry, Kathryn. Following on from what you were saying, what I find interesting is how varied the contracts can be. As a single freelancer, you know, with several clients, you're probably seeing several quite different contracts. And again, I think that might take some people a bit by surprise. They think about how they want to work as a freelance writer or whatever. Maybe they think about their own terms and so on and so forth. And then essentially you're being faced with half a dozen clients, all of whom are telling you you're going to work how they want you to work. And it's different in each of those 6 cases, sort of thing. And that's a little bit of adjustment that, again, needs to be thought through. I mean, contracts, as I said, I'm not very good with them and I don't like them. But, you know, the important thing is if there is one, to make sure you're clear on what's said in there, sort of thing. And then to some extent, so long as both parties play along with the contract, a working relationship can be very smooth. Just out of interest, we've had several questions asking the obvious question. What happens when they don't pay you? Have you got any advice? Julia, I'm going to go for you. You know, have you got problems with clients not paying? What's your view on that? And without going into too much depth, what are the sort of strategies you've undertaken there?
So I tend to agree 30-day payment terms with most clients because that's normal for most agencies, I would say. We did have a particular client whose terms were 90 days, but also they had terrible internal processes. So it took me 6 months to get paid several £1,000s, which was really quite annoying at the time. But they warned me going into it that was the case. They knew their processes were terrible. The person who recommended that company told me that I would be late getting paid. And I knew they had 90-day payment terms. But it kind of goes back to what Odel was saying earlier in terms of you need to have cash flow when you're going into freelancing. You can't be relying on getting paid on time, because sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you just don't get paid on time and you need to still be able to pay your rent or your mortgage. So yeah, my advice there is kind of don't be relying. It's not like when you're in-house, when you've got that paycheck and then all your bills go out and it's all happening on the same day. It's completely different from that. You just need to have a completely different way of dealing with your money when you're freelancing. And actually, to go back to what you were talking about earlier, I know you can be unlucky, and I know, Vicki, you were quite unlucky with 3 of your clients jumping ship all at the same time, but normally that obviously doesn't happen all at the same time. But Peter, I know you've mentioned in the past not putting all your eggs in one basket. I think that's really something that's important, to have a breadth of clients operating at the same time. If you're working 5 days a week, maybe do a couple of days here and a couple of days there. Don't do 5 days all for one client, because you really can get stuck if, you know, that client jumps ship entirely, or if they don't pay you on time, or various other things happen. I think it's really important for all of those reasons not to just stick with one client at a time.
Yeah. Again, just to make an obvious point, and maybe it is now historical, but I clearly remember a couple of or 3 years ago when the pandemic hit, and you know, freelancers were literally waking up in the morning and the work had gone, full stop, at least temporarily, as it turned out, which was great. But you just have to, as we're all saying, you just have to think of yourself as a business and put in some strategies and understand that there's ups and downs and be ready for that sort of thing. Because there's lots of reasons why a client might actually decide to stop working with you. And it can be completely no fault of your own, but it's just stuff happens, sort of thing. And one of the things on that sort of thinking that I always try and encourage freelancers to think about is the value of talking to each other. And communities of freelancers and so on, have a big, small, informal, formal. One of the things that I think is offered through the MedComms workbook service is a sense of community. There are 200 freelancers who can talk to each other. I run various meetings and so on. You can support each other and talk to each other. Vicki, I'm going to just drag you in. We are running out of time, I must admit, but I'm going to specifically put you on the spot slightly, Vicki, because I know you are part of a little group that meets regularly up in sort of Leeds type area. Just say a few words about the value of having people around you that you can talk to.
It's invaluable. It really is. I mean, you don't have that office contact that you get when you're in house or working in a building. You don't have the team around you. So if you've got a problem with something, if you don't understand something, if you just want a bit of advice, you don't have anybody to turn to. You can't just wander over to somebody's desk. And by building up sort of like local networks, we've got a WhatsApp group and we're often on there. Somebody will say, help, I've got a problem with this, or has anybody come across that? There's a wider network group as well that you can go on, but it's nice when it's local, and we meet up maybe about every 6 weeks, and we'll sit and talk about things that we're working on. We often pass work between each other. If there's stuff that, you know, somebody comes to us and we can't do it because we haven't got capacity, we'll ask on our little network again. But it's not only that, it's also just the friendship that you get from it, from people who are in exactly the same situation as you. You know, they understand the pressures of freelancing, and that is different to working in an office. And you know, we're almost like a little family now, actually. We've been meeting for years, and yeah, it's invaluable.
And you've got a group that meets up locally around a table, as it were, for lunch and so on. I mean, you've also got, again, the LinkedIn type situation.
Yeah, we do lunches or an evening meal, and at Christmas we have a little Christmas do with a secret Santa, you know, and things like that. We celebrate each other's birthdays. It's nice. And I mean, last week I met up with 2 of them and went for a dog walk because they're more local to me. So it's just, yeah, it's nice having that support network. And also through them you get new contacts as well. So it's just all about networking.
Exactly. I think it's really, really important. And I was just going to say, you know, if you haven't got anybody locally, I mean, the two points I make is, one, if you don't know anybody locally, find them and run a little group yourself, or off to, you know, arrange a coffee meeting or whatever it is that works for you. But also, again, to come back to points that several of you talked about in terms of LinkedIn, I mean, it's a marvelous opportunity to make contacts with people all over the world. And there are lots of LinkedIn groups and various different sorts of groups out there for freelancers specifically, or that include freelancers in them, where you can gain contacts and get support from each other and so on. So I'd encourage anybody to reach out to each other, and indeed to the panelists here. I mean, that's part of the point of this exercise. So please do that. We are over time, and there's a lot of questions, quite specific questions that I'm skipping over quite badly here. I think probably what we ought to do in terms of the recording is just close it down at the moment. I'm gonna fire a final question at each of you. I don't know whether this is going to work okay, but can each of you give us a quick tip for people who are thinking about becoming freelancers? Then we'll close this part of the recording, and those online can stick around, and we'll be here till the top of the hour, so we've got time to cover off some of these questions. But in what order am I going to go? Odel, come on. I'm going to start with you. This is random. Have you got a tip that you can throw somebody who's thinking of going freelance?
Yes, so I would say don't neglect the little things. So for example, I have a separate business phone, business number, and my email address has a personalized domain name, so it's not just at outlook.com or gmail.com. I've received good feedback from clients who have kind of been like, oh, that's a nice email. I think it gives some credibility to the business, and it just seems a little bit more professional, which can always help.
Okay, I'm bouncing around here. Vicki, go on. Have you got a tip that you can throw people?
I think really just to reiterate what I've already said, that it's okay to say no. Don't overstretch yourself. It's better to do a good job on smaller projects, or, you know, just for 1 or 2 clients, and slowly build up. Don't overstretch yourself, because it can be very detrimental, because as been mentioned, it is a small industry and it's quite incestuous and people move around. So you don't want a bad reputation to follow you.
Okay, all right, Julia, you got a point?
Yeah, I would say make sure your business is working for you. So similar to Vicki, like it's in the busy periods, it would be really easy to be sort of working 24/7. At some times during the last few years, there's been enough work to do that. So just make sure you keep the reason you went freelancing at the forefront of your mind. If you want to pick up your kids from school, or if, like me, you want to be on the beach every single day, you know, keep that forefront of your mind, and that makes it easier to kind of make your business work for you.
Okay, excellent. Go on, Kathryn, last word to you.
Don't beat yourself up if things go wrong. If clients don't work out, or you make a mistake, just don't beat yourself up. I think setting up a business in the first place, hats off to you if you give it a try. I would never, well, don't say never, but I would be very reluctant to go back into employment. I've enjoyed the whole process, and I think that's key. Enjoy the process, give yourself a break. If things go slightly wrong, we're human at the end of the day, and just enjoy the process of managing your own business and having that autonomy.
Okay, all right. But I guess everyone's going to nod their heads and go, freelancing has loads of opportunity. It's think about it, obviously, but there's plenty of work out there. It can be really great lifestyle, frankly. Work it to your own advantage and so on. But yeah, just everyone goes, yes, freelancing in MedComms is a good opportunity for those that want to, yeah? Finish on a positive note.
Yes.
Go for it. And the important point is reach out to each other, and you guys are very happy to hear from people. So via LinkedIn is an easy way. People can reach out to you. I know you're all very happy to hear from them. If they want to know more about what I'm up to, medcommsnetworking.com, or reach out to me. LinkedIn is, again, an easy way of doing it. I'm going to say a huge thank you to the panelists, huge thank you to the large audience that have been sitting there from around the world. We're going to have a few more minutes with the audience today, but for the purpose of the recording, I'd like to just say goodbye, take care, and stay in touch. So everyone give it a wave. Thank you. Bye.